Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our discussion of Sitting Pretty. Um, we have a collab this evening, so we have some folks from Culturally Lit. Funny enough, that is myself as well, wearing two hats this evening. But I'm also proud to be the Community Impact Manager for the International Festival of Arts and Ideas. We want to give a shout out to our sponsors this evening is made possible by the NEA Big Read. The NEA Big Read is a program of the National Endowment of the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. We also want to give a shout out to our great partners at the New Haven Free Public Library, the City of New Haven, specifically the Office of Persons with Disabilities, and the David T. Lockhart Foundation. And I'm joined today by some amazing people. So I will let them introduce themselves. Fiona, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, my name is Fiona Bryson. I'm an educator in Connecticut, and I am thrilled to be working as the Impact Coordinator at the International Festival of Arts and Ideas in New Haven. And I'm excited to get into this amazing book that we got to work on. So I'm going to pass this over to Elaine.
Well, hello there. I'm Elaine Kolb. I like to introduce myself as a fat, old, ruddy white dyke. When I go out, I drive a 6-wheel power wheelchair. Right now, I'm sitting here in my manual chair because I'm at home. And I think it's safe to say that I'm the senior of this group. I'm 73. And I acquired my physical disability over 45 years ago. And I'll just stop there because I think we should pass it on to Keel Mary now.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Thank you, Shar, for inviting me. So my name is Keel Mary Sotillo. I work for the Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center as a parent consultant, a bilingual parent consultant in both Spanish and English. I've been with them going on 11 years next year, and the agency supports families who have children with special needs birth to age 26. It's known as the Parent Training and Information Center for the state of Connecticut, which under federal law, every state has to have one. So our services are completely free and offered throughout the entire state. Thank you.
You. And I just want to point out that Keel Mary and Missy Lane are also a part of our One City, One Read advisory committee. They have been working with Fiona and I since last fall in curating different programming and just really educating us as we step into this journey because we believe that this is not just a one-hit wonder for us, but a continuing relationship. So I want to thank them for their time and their commitment because we've spent several afternoons together, different evenings doing different things. So I just want to express my grace. A lot of folks know Culturally Lit or Elm City Lit Fest for our podcast and our book festival. So it's only right that we were able to partner with the International Festival of Arts and Ideas to discuss Sitting Pretty. So I just want to jump right in, everybody. What were some of your initial reactions to the book?
Do you want me to go first?
Sure.
I feel like even though we're in 2023, we still have so much more to go. And I appreciated how she was able to highlight what it was like for her as a child, but also as a working woman and the challenges that she faced from housing to employment, even dating. So she really took you through the different phases of her life and nice like snapshots of her life. So it was really, and it had a really nice flow to it.
I think something that stuck out for me, especially since Rebecca talks about her experiences teaching about disability justice to non-disabled students, especially those in higher socioeconomic statuses, is just a reminder of how much of the work we have to do is ongoing and a constant way of thinking and just checking in with yourself and saying, how many things did I go through today? that maybe would have been that much harder in a different situation, and not taking privilege for granted.
Yeah, I was just amazed that we're doing this at all, to be honest. And I am just so thankful that the International Festival of Arts and Ideas and the Big Read offered this book, and that this book got chosen. And for me personally, it was fascinating because Rebecca benefited from things that some of us did to get the Americans with Disabilities Act passed. And at the same time, we have so much more to do, and yet we have come so far. This, to me, this is just, it's thrilling that we're doing this at all, that this is actually being discussed in the schools and in the libraries, and as a theme in the International Festival of Arts and Ideas. Woohoo!
We all have to do our part, right? And I think sometimes a lot of organizations are doing DEI work, and a lot of that ends up just being race. But I think within that, accessibility is something that needs to be talked about and highlighted. How are folks including our brothers and sisters who identify with a disability? What are accommodations that we're making? What is the inclusivity? Because us making accommodations are really for able-bodied folks. Like, we're not doing folks a favor. It's really just, I think a lot of time we think, oh, we're helping out, and it's like, no, because a lot of folks seem that they can't sort of function, or there becomes a lot of their uncomfortability. So we're proud to be doing this and to really, be doing our part. Something that stuck out for me in the book is a lot of the data that I learned, and the insight on her life. One part that I'll talk about, she talks about the data on page 1415, and she says a disabled person is twice as likely to live below the poverty line, with an annual income about $25,400 less for a person with who identifies as able-bodied, and only 36% of disabled people are employed. That's striking. That's striking. And what I've come to learn in this journey is that this is a forced poverty. That if you dare make a dollar over, folks want to take your benefits. Would folks like to share a little bit about that, or kind of give us a little bit more insight about what they've seen in their experience or their work regarding that?
I can share. Some years ago, actually, my son, I think, was 3 or 4 at the time, and I had applied for SSI, and I was $100 over, so I couldn't qualify. So I chose to continue to work, but when you think of $100, it really wasn't that much of a difference. But sometimes families do make decisions to not work or reduce their hours so that they're able to qualify for additional benefits.
Right now, in the state of Connecticut, there has been an effort called Fix Husky C. See, this is the thing. People don't understand there's different types of husky. And there is extreme, life-threatening, freedom-threatening stuff going on, discriminatory against elders and people with disabilities right now in the state of Connecticut. And we can lose our lives or our freedom because the cutoff points are actually lower, and the benefits, the assets you're allowed to have are lower than they are for other people on Husky. Excuse me? Can you? Anyway, right now, they're doing the budget, and this will definitely make a difference. A whole lot of people are afraid to make a little extra money because they will be cut off, or they will lose the home care services that they need because they made a little too much money. It's horrifying. It's cruel. And it can be changed. But we're expendable. That's the thing. That's ableism. We are not recognized as full citizens still. And we're expendable. A lot of people see that. Oh, it's a shame, but who would want to live like that anyway?
Yeah, and I think especially with working, when you mention, sort of the discriminatory aspect to these cutoff points, in the book, when Rebecca's talking about ableism and the workforce, she talks about her father and how he never missed a day of work and he would get up every day and keep this strict schedule. So the ableism that she mentions in that section is this idea that we tend to have in the American workforce about how active you are. And this idea that if you're not hustling, if you're not at your job 9 to 5 every day, sitting on the phone and miserable, that you're somehow lazy or, not contributing to the workplace. And I think that fits in with what you're saying there, Elaine, that there's this assumption that the income level should be lower because there's an assumption that a disabled population is not working as much, because there's that idea of what is work and what is valuable work.
Actually, on Tuesday, there was an event at the Wilson branch, More Than Sitting Pretty, a poetry reading and workshop with Sarah Rizzuto. And she passed out some information, and she quoted from chapter 1 from the book. Ableism, and this is a quotation from the book, ableism is the process of favoring, fetishizing, and building the world around a mostly imagined, idealized body, while discriminating against those bodies perceived to move, see, hear, process, operate, look, or need differently from that vision. Ableism is deadly. It's dehumanizing, like all the other negative isms.
For folks who may not be in the loop on ableism, y'all, what are some misconceptions that folks can have about ableism? The Webster's dictionary of ableism, in addition to what Ms. Elaine just said, is discrimination in favor of able-bodied people. I think that's really generic. And I think what I found is that on my journey of learning, that a lot of people think they're helping when they're not. That you're back to what you were saying about assuming, Fiona, that people think, oh, you don't need that. You can't do that. You don't, let me push you. Let me open this for you. Let me reach this for you, when that could be perceived as sort of humiliating. Like, you're not giving me a chance. You're assuming, you're not asking what I need or what would be helpful. You don't know my abilities, what I'm able to do. So what are some things that we can share with folks to just kind of be aware of? Like, we understand you want to help, but your helping may not be helping. You may be harming and not even realizing it. I
think ableism is insidious. It's like when there is a power differential, okay? The one that is discriminated against can see it clearly, feel it. It's there. The person in the superior power position doesn't think it's happening at all, doesn't even notice it. It's not there. It's like, so many white people don't understand that racism is something that we pick up. It's a toxic thing in the culture. And ableism is the same. Only people are conditioned to see there's like a pity party. When I go out, I try to broadcast strength and confidence. Over and over and over again, somebody will question whether I should be out by myself. Don't you have someone meeting you? Or you shouldn't be out on a day like today. So strangers will assume somehow that they have the power and the right and the duty to take over my life and tell me how to live and what to do. That's ableism.
I think when I think about discrimination and Shaw, your point about a lot of people think that they're helping, and with any type of discrimination, I think one of the misconceptions is, it's not enough to just not be ableist yourself or not be racist yourself. It's the entire system that's based on a norm and then humans who exist outside of the norm. Whereas the goal is to be able to view all of humankind as accessing everything equally, because we all come in, different shapes and sizes. And we know that, and we're able to talk about that easily when, it comes to, if you ask someone if they're racist, obviously they're going to say, hopefully they'll say, no, I'm not racist. Right. But it's beyond that conscious level, right? It's about constantly exploring, is this something that anyone could access? And recognizing that benefits us all. When everyone can access everything, then we thrive.
There's a quote in the book that I really liked where she says, the goal is not to avoid falling or needing help. The goal is to be seen, asked, heard, believed, valued as we are, allowed to exist in these exact bodies, invited to the party, and encouraged to dance however we want to. I think sometimes folks, when they look at individuals with varying degrees of disabilities, they see limitations. And sometimes they don't think about being asked to go to a party or being asked to join in some fun activity, because they start thinking of all the barriers instead of thinking how we can make it inclusive. My now 20-year-old son he's on the spectrum. He has autism, and there were so many times kids would come back after a weekend and talk about birthday parties, and he would come home on a Monday afternoon sad and disappointed that all these kids got together and he didn't get invited to the party. And as his mom, it was really hard, because you want kids to like your kid and you want an invite. So it's a challenge, right? You can't force kids to include your child. So it would really be nice if parents could be more inclusive. If we're going to invite, a few kids, think about the impact for the other kids in the classroom, because it is hard for kids.
Disability is a very broad classification. All different kinds of people have many different kinds and levels and degrees of different kinds of disabilities. Some are visible and physical. People can see I use a wheelchair. They can't see that I have post-traumatic stress syndrome. They can't see that I have had major mental emotional issues. So the term able bodied is not inclusive enough. So we have all different kinds of disabilities, and we are the largest minority. And this is true all over the world. And yet, we are the only major minority that anybody can join at any time.
Mm.
And as a matter of fact, if you look at lifespan experience, we are a majority experience. So some of us, and different people use different terminology, but some of us kind of like the breakdown that we are people with disabilities or disabled people. Then there's non disabled people. And then there's not yet disabled people. And the thing is, once you add it all together in terms of your lifespan experience, it's a majority experience. So, why are we excluded so much? Disabiliphobia, besides ableism, disabiliphobia is like homophobia, the fear of. And people will kill what they're afraid of.
Mm.
And we know that.
Real talk, Miss Elaine.
And I think it sobers it up for some people, right? In the sense of like, okay, I, f- I feel like with a lot of time when folks talk about getting over different isms, different phobias, it's like, okay, change will come slow. We just got to take your time. But time is of the essence. There really is no time to take your time. These adjustments they have an urgency attached to them. There's an urgency to diving into ableism and changing that process. There's an urgency in the healthcare system. There's an urgency in the housing the housing crisis. I'll share a few facts right now. Disabled adults experience poverty at more than twice the rate of non disabled adults. Nearly half of adults ages 25 to 61 who have lived in poverty for at least 1 year have a disability, while point in time counts suggest that nearly 25% of more than 580,000 people experiences homelessness or any given right in the United States have a disability. This trend affects disabled women and disabled people of color at dis- disproportionate rates. Disabled people also hold a higher share of medical debts, experience higher rates of food insecurity, and receive lower pay. These and other factors contribute to higher rates of homelessness. So I think I want folks to really understand this is a systematic issue as well as a societal cultural issue. Um, and bringing to light that it's deeper than just what you see every day or just these different things, that it's there are people going through a lot of suffering, people who are trapped. Mr. Lane tells us all the time there are folks trapped in nursing homes, there are folks trapped in institutions because folks don't want to deal with it. You feel like you can shut someone in. We recently screened the movie Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution, which involved the late great Judy Heumann, and I think we'll touch on Judy before our time here together ends. But within that film, they show there's a lot of young folks who different age groups who their family put them in institutions thinking that it would be helpful or that it's rehabilitative, but then they're just finding out that their people are getting no care, that folks are more so suffering and sort of in pain and going through traumatic experiences rather than getting the help that they need. A lot of folks back in the day, and I believe even today, would just you got that cousin or that friend or that auntie who stays in the room. They don't come out. You would take them their food, and it's like, no, we're not in a place where never really been in a place to take anyone's voice, to take anyone's autonomy. Everyone has an autonomy, whether you have a disability or not. You have a right to live your life as you please. Um, so I'm interested in what have folks seen that in their work, seen that in just their own experience, and more so, how can people educate themselves? How can people do their part to help um, the movement as we really dive into disability justice and disability rights?
Well, first, I think people have to acknowledge that this is life or death for a whole lot of people. One of the things, I'm a songwriter, among other things, and a performer. And songs come to me, messages come to me. And back in July of 2020, I saw a PBS news story. Now, I knew there were lots of us on waiting lists around the world, around the country, all over the country, but I didn't realize that 500,000. Can you imagine? There's 500,000 of our people with disabilities on waiting lists. Sometimes those waiting lists are for years for essential things like housing or equipment or home care. Thousands of people right here in the state of Connecticut are on waiting lists. And how can they dare brag about having a surplus and still not make it possible for our people to live in freedom? Where's the outrage? Why can't people see that we're human too? We're just people, just like you. And yet, until you've had the personal experience yourself or somebody very close to you, you don't understand. You just don't. You don't see it. You only see what you're looking for or the lived experience that you have. Compassionate inclusion means caring for everyone, the elders and disabled, the children and the youth. That's the chorus of the song.
I want to add to that as well for families who are waiting to have their child on the DDS for the autism. That wait list is so long. And when you have families that sometimes are in crisis, in need of support services, respite care, you think about youth that need services for mental health, and there's long wait lists just to access a clinician. You know, I called recently for my own son, he's 14, and I was told that there's a 5.5 to 6 month wait list. The issues are happening right now. 5.5 months to 6 months could be life altering. But that's just the reality, not just for myself, but I also think of families who are monolingual that do not speak English, and then they have to wait for an interpreter and then ensure that there's an effective interpreter, and then those challenges. So it's just like this vicious cycle, depending where you're at. It just gets harder and harder to access services. And that's not even including issues with the school system. When I think of special education and the lack of support, you know, currently there's trained staff, paraprofessionals that are trained, clinicians in different areas from occupational therapy to physical therapy to speech services. And these are all services that are provided under IDEA, the Individuals with Disability Educational Act, that children who have special needs should be afforded to, but there's just a lack of staff and adult support in schools.
Kia, while you're touching upon special education for parents who may have a child who may need special education or some of those resources, can you just briefly tell folks what are some things that they should be asking for their child, or things that should be afforded to them that they just, may be nervous about or may not know about, that they have the right to?
Absolutely. So under IDEA, there's something called Child Fine, which means children ages 3 to 22, under Part B of the statutes for Connecticut, say that in this federal law, say that schools have an obligation to identify these students, to locate and evaluate in all areas of a suspected disability. So I want to highlight the word suspected. That does not mean they have to have a diagnosis. So I want to make sure families understand that. So if you suspect that there's something going on, it could also be behaviors. I don't think families sometimes recognize that there's issues with behaviors. The reason why that's important is because sometimes children, young children, are having significant behavioral challenges in school, and the school may just call the parent to say, hey, come pick up your child, and the family doesn't know any better and goes pick up the child. If the student is missing 90 minutes or more, technically that's a suspension. So families should really think about, when they're getting those phone calls, what kinds of supports are being put in place. Maybe we should have a meeting, a planning and placement team meeting. Maybe that should be a referral when it's an ongoing issue. I'm not talking about the child is sick and they say, come pick him up. I'm talking about when they literally say, your child is having a really bad day, your child had a meltdown, your child is not actively participating, or they take the child and remove them and put them in the office or the nurse's office or some other room in the school building. Again, if they're missing 90 minutes or more, technically, legally, that's a suspension. But they don't write it as such. So if the parent picks up the child, they don't really document that. So that's really important for families to know. There are supportive interventions that the school can provide. There's tiered levels of support under SRBI, scientific research based interventions, or some places say RTI, response to interventions. So that should be an automatic. If students are having difficulty, behaviors or academically, schools should be they should be identifying them through their SST meetings. And then they should be identifying which students may need these levels of interventions. And then between tier 2 and tier 3, that may be a referral to special education, right? That means the student needs a little bit more. Maybe they need specialized instruction, but sometimes they'll keep these students too long in these interventions. They're supposed to be heavily progress monitoring these interventions 6 to 8 weeks. If these interventions are not working, they're collecting data. They have a baseline, they have a goal line where the student's at. And if we don't see where the student is making progress, they should be meeting. Maybe they need to modify the goals. Maybe they need to look at something else. Maybe this should, again, be a referral. And then when we think of 504s, that's separate. That's for students who already have a diagnosis. It could be diabetes, it could be ADHD, and they may need accommodations. Now, for ADHD, that may also be a student that needs an IEP. So I don't want to just mix up and think it's only for, but just because you do have a medical diagnosis doesn't necessarily qualify you for an individual educational plan. So I want to make sure that's clear. It is how that disability impacts the child academically. And they can always contact the office. I can share the number if that's okay.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
860-739-3089. And the services, again, are provided for free. We provide training. I facilitate, along with my colleagues, a Spanish support call every Wednesday at 1 via Zoom, and we Facebook Live it. We provide different trainings. We have a Transition Tuesday, so for kiddos 14 and older that are going through transition with an IEP. We have training, I want to say it's like the second Tuesday of the month, and that's at night from 7 to 9. We have a support group for families who have young children on Thursdays at 4, also through Zoom. And again, our services are free, so families can call us, even if it's just a resource. They want to connect to get, I don't know, maybe ABA, or they're looking for a summer camp for their children with a disability. Thank you.
Thank you, Keo.
I just want to give a hug to the sign language interpreter, because you're supposed to be getting a break about now, and you've been doing a lot of work, so thank you. We have evolved as a movement. The disability rights movement has evolved. In the early stages, disability rights was too much, too often, too white, with a lot of men in control, a lot of experts and highly educated people in control, and a hierarchy of what disabilities were above or below other disabilities. We've evolved. And part of what is so powerful about this book is that if you go to the back, you can see there are people there listed and things listed that are really moving things forward in a way that is positive and powerful. And now, some people like to use the term disability justice matters, because disability justice is interracial, multicultural, intergenerational, intersectional, gender fluid, and with cross disability inclusion. That's everyone, no exceptions. Nobody gets left out. And if you look up a few things, the back of the book is good. Also, look up something, sins invalid. Disability justice is so important. And right now, if you look this up, for example, there is something that is on the national level, which would make a huge difference. It's called the LaTanya Reeves Freedom Act of 2023. And LATONYA, LaTanya Reeves Freedom Act of 2023. And it's Senate Bill 1193 and House Bill, House of Representatives 2708. We've tried so hard to make it possible for people to live in the community in freedom. We've come a long ways, and yet there's still a completely horrifying institutional bias. They'll pay to put you in a nursing home, but not to provide the services in the community so you can live in freedom. So this, the LaTanya Reeves Freedom Act, would make it possible, would set it up that living in freedom would be a constitutional right. I'm wearing a t-shirt, Disabled in Action. Judy Heumann started Disabled in Action way back when. Please, if you can, if you haven't watched it already, watch Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution. And there'll be another screening of it on Saturday, June 3rd from 2 to 4 p.m. at the Mitchell Library in New Haven. I'm going to be there. If you haven't watched it, watch it. It's so powerful. And towards the end of it, there are scenes that are what happened to help get the Americans with Disabilities Act passed. And I personally was at some of those scenes, and some of the people in those scenes are no longer on the planet. And one of them is Judy Heumann. She died very suddenly on March 4th. And yet, her death has galvanized a whole set of happenings all over. And she also was one of the people listed in Rebecca's book in the back. There's a place for everyone in disability justice. Please join us.
Thank you, Miss Elaine. As Miss Elaine was just sharing, we want to give our flowers and our love to the late great Judy Heumann. Um, we were planning this year to host Judy Heumann. I had the pleasure of meeting her at Connecticut College. She was working with their sort of one city, one read that they have up in that area of the state, and they were discussing her book, Being Human. Um, and if you watch Crip Camp, once you get past the part when they all met at Camp Jeanette in New York, they all out of them moved to California and began organizing around Section 504. Section 504 was a law that pre ADA that was about that says no otherwise qualified handicapped individual in the United States shall solely on the basis of his or her handicap be excluded from participation, be denied the benefits of, or be the subject to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So this was the foundational sort of blueprint that was pre ADA. And as you can see in the film, and I hope that you would all do your history, that there was a lot of pushback of folks wanting to pass this. A lot of people didn't understand why it's going to be too expensive. Why? What's the point of this? But as we all know, there is a point to it. These are basic human rights that everyone should have. It's very it's gross to know that you have to fight to not be discriminated against, that you have to actually get it put into law that someone can't mistreat you. So we want to give our love and our shout out to Miss Judy Heumann. This year is 33 years of ADA, and everything hasn't been done. There are several places where it's not up to code. There are several buildings that aren't up to code. And when we say the code, it's not just doing the bare minimum. If you do things right the first time, you won't have to go back and replace them. In several apartments, there'll be 2 or 3 accessible apartments. As Ms. Elaine was stating earlier, and Keo as well, that like, this disability is something that you can age into. There's a lot of not yet disabled people. So what do you do if you're elderly and now you know your knees don't work as good as they used? You need some assistance. What if you can't get into the tub? What if you need some more space? So I urge folks to think inclusive in the beginning. Have, when you think of your DEI tables and your round tables, include folks who identify with disability, seen and unseen, as well as everyone else who should be at the table. If your table has everything that it should be and represent, you won't have to go back. You won't have to second guess. You won't have to make revisions. Renovations are expensive. If you sow the seed the first time, you'll have a greater fruit. So I know we're coming up on our time, so I want to give folks the ability to leave the audience with some things, how folks can reach you, anything that's coming to mind that may be on your heart about the book, about anything that we've discussed thus far.
I want to touch on the book where she mentions that attempts at kindness can be healing to humiliating, helpful to traumatic, and also that acts of kindness really highlights the able body. And I don't think people think about that. So one of the things she mentions is something that she's probably done 1,000 times. Someone will naturally say, "Can I do that for you?" And then she'll fumble, and then whatever it was that she was doing will eventually fall. Had they just left her alone, she could have managed. Instead of jumping in, why not just ask, "Do you need help?" So just really seeing folks and seeing possibilities, instead of jumping in right away. And I know they mean well, but one of the things she mentions is that they even would congratulate her boyfriend for dating her because she's a person in a wheelchair. Like, it wasn't obvious to folks that that was his girlfriend. Instead, they would think that that was his sister or caretaker. She talked about a trip where he carried her and how people praised him. Um, so it's sometimes dehumanizing to have to go through that, where people don't see you outside of your disability.
I'm glad you brought that part up, Keo, with the humanity and just thinking about what it's like to live in a transgressive body. So going back to when there's norms and you're outside of the norm, how you just get used to thinking about, there are people that are, the haves in societies, and Elaine likes to use this, right? And there are the people who are the have-nots, and you sort of get used to what box you fit in, and then that sort of guides you for the rest of your life. Whereas if we can focus on, the humanity first and all of us. So when she talks about dating, and she talks about Micah, and I follow them on Instagram, and they're really cute. So you should definitely check out Rebecca's Instagram, because she and Micah are just adorable. But yeah, and she talks about the neighbor who thought he was her brother or something, and he couldn't figure that, even though she said, he'd seen us together, he'd seen us kissing. So did this neighbor, actually think we were brother and sister, with all these weird relationship things, rather than coming to the conclusion, oh, they're together. Or in Crip Camp, one of the parts that really struck me in Crip Camp was, one of the women ended up, with a venereal disease, and she went to the doctor, and the doctor took out a whole healthy kidney or her appendix, because that's what the doctor assumed was going on, rather than get to the conclusion of, oh, it's gonorrhea. He just assumed, okay, it couldn't possibly be that, right? So I think that's sort of, and when Elaine brings in the intersectionality and how this helps all of us. So Rebecca was talking about, her feminism and what feminism meant to her, especially being in circles where she sort of felt on the outside, because the women were talking about, babies and motherhood and this whole thing, and people sort of assumed that that wasn't on her plate. And so she talks about when, women were really trying to show up and protest and be more active during the last administration. And she talks about how many women, while she was out there and she was able to make her poster and protest with her people, she thinks about how many women were not able to come out that day because, they were at home and not able to access the space.
Thank you for that.
So when we uplift some of us, we uplift all of us.
I want people to understand that we have to really look at ableism and disabilitophobia, and yet not go for guilt or for shame or blame. And it's complicated. And for those who don't know, I was literally stabbed in the back. That's how I got my spinal cord injury. And this was in September of 1977. I was 28. I thought I was really cool about progressive stuff. I was anti-racist. I was, all that's interracial, but, I was out as a lesbian. I was like against the war. I mean, I was assisting people in prison and like all that stuff. I did not know that I was ableist. I didn't know it. I had no idea. And then when I had to deal with it and face it and experience it, I had to face the fact that I was one of the people that was oppressing other people, and I was putting myself down. Because just having a disability doesn't mean you understand about disability rights. And you're not automatically somebody that's going to fight ableism. We do it to ourselves too. It's a toxic society. We have to forgive ourselves and each other and find ways that we can meet together and share our true thoughts and feelings collectively. That's what makes the difference. Let's get together, all kinds of people, and figure out how together we can make a positive difference. It's just that include people with disabilities now. Don't exclude us. Don't leave us out. We're like we're what doesn't get listed on in a lot of the lists of like oppressions. We don't even get listed, and yet we're the largest group. What's with that? So let's break down those barriers, open our hearts, and open ourselves, and face the fact that most non-disabled or not yet disabled people may not know it, but most of us are afraid of becoming disabled. It's one of our fears. It was my fear, and I didn't even know it.
And I'll leave us with the point in the book on the very, very last page, on page 224, where she talks about the future. She says, in this future, people won't be punished, shamed, isolated, excluded, cast to the fringes, or told to go around the back, or to find another toilet because of that body. Bodies in all their variant forms will be considered, allowed, and welcomed. Our vast differences will be thought of as we design our structures, our buildings, our healthcare, our transportation, our mobility aids, our roads, our governments, our clothing, our classrooms, our spaces of work and play, our notions of love and romance, parenthood and friendships. In this future, we will not be encouraged to silence our bodies. Instead of rejecting and abusing our bodies to fit in the boxes, our boxes will be bigger and malleable. This future doesn't only recognize but honors the fact that our bodies grow and tire, rebel and tremble, and fight and change and scar and defy categorization. This future won't appear out of thin air. We have to create it, little by little, as we practice listening to, caring for, and respecting all of our bodies. Please, let's create this world for each other. So we leave you with a call to action, that we hope that our time here just wasn't something that didn't go one ear, not your other ear, but that you feel inspired, that you feel a sort of ignite lighted within you to do something, to educate yourself, and to be a part of something bigger than you. And in creating this world that's not going to appear and it's not going to be handed to us. So it's something that we have to fight for intentionally and do our part every day within our spheres to make a difference, because it doesn't have to be a utopia. It doesn't have to be 50 years from now. I think 33 years and prior to that has been long enough. I think we're overdue. I think we're running on borrowed time. So with that being said, I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for coming to tonight's discussion on Sitting Pretty, A View from Our Resilient Ordinary Disabled Body by Rebecca Towson. We have copies of the book available. If anyone would like a copy, you can reach out to me. I'll put my information in the comments. And at all of our One City, One Read events, we will have copies of the book available. Our next event is June 9th, and it is an evening with Jerome Ellis. Jerome will be responding to Rebecca Towson's book. That is happening Thursday, June 9th at 7:30 p.m. at the Yale Schwartzman Center. You can find more information on our website at ouridea.org. And then our final event for this year's One City, One Read will be Together We Rise, Resources and Disability Justice Fair. That will be happening on the New Haven Green, June 21st on a Wednesday from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. Please check out our website at artidea.org for more information. We hope to see you, and we hope this won't be our last time together. I just want to give a big thanks to Fiona and Keo and Missy Lane and our wonderful, wonderful interpreter for spending this time with us, and our amazing folks in media, Tiffany and Bridget, for making all this possible, and our friends at Culturally Lit. You can find more information about Culturally Lit at culturallylit.org. That's culture with the K. And thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.